Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome once again to the ROS Media channel. If you don't know who I am, my name's Andy. I'm in charge of the ROS Media channel here in the Freedom Plan. And we've got, once again, my good friend Ian Clifford, who is our founder and president of the Republic of Old Souls. We're here on our Protocol Pep Talk. And today we are going to be discussing something that I think is going to be very interesting to a lot of people. We're going to be talking about a US tax discharge protocol. This is something that Ian's done an immense amount of research on, and we're probably going to get a little bit more technical today on this particular interview, because we really want you to understand why this works, because this could be fundamentally, a game changer for many people. We were only talking just before we went live that there are many people out there who have huge unpaid tax bills, and it's not that they don't feel that they owe it, don't want to pay it. They're not in a position to pay it. Maybe they got hit through, through financial difficulties back in 2020. We all know what happened back then. And maybe that change of events meant that they had no option but to use the money that they were setting aside for taxes just to live off of. And that's something that has affected many, many business owners and entrepreneurs. And they're now in a situation where they can't, they're on the back foot. They don't know how to be able to get back on track with their taxes. The next year's tax bill arrives, but they still owe taxes from 2, 3, 4 years ago. And it's just a never-ending pit that they seem to be falling into. So I think this is going to be of real interest to people, Ian, and I'm really excited to talk about it. So welcome back to the media channel.
Well, good day, everybody. And I've been looking at taxes and how you mitigate them for many, many years. And I wish I'd known many years ago what I know today, because I could have helped. I had a lot of very high net worth clients back in my early career when I had wealth management practice. And my clients were entrepreneurs. That's the profile of my clients, right? So they were business owners, high net worths, celebrities, and they had tax problems. I had footballers that had major tax problems. I had, modest low-level celebrities. I had some of the biggest, entrepreneurs out there that were in the rich list for a while. Some of them were in and out of the rich list. So I had some pretty heavy hitters on the Monopoly Board of Commerce. And one thing that they happened to them a lot, and you might be thinking, well, this doesn't apply to you, but it's all relative, right? They would have some problem occur in their world, and some of their worlds were very complex. And even though they started off putting a reserve together to pay their tax bill when it arrived, they dipped into that reserve because they had some other problem that came along that was more important at the time than keeping their tax bill or their tax payments in reserve. And then when the tax bill came in, there was a blind panic because, oh my God, I haven't got this available to me anymore. What can I do? So they'd call me and say, Ian, what can we do to get out of this problem? Now, I have applied many strategies to help people in that scenario many, many years ago. But I wish I'd known about this, which I didn't know about this back in those days. I'm talking 25 years ago now and more. But the landscape hasn't really changed. It's the same landscape today as it was back then. But the solution that we are going to talk about today would have worked then equally well as it works today.
Well, let's talk about that. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is the history behind this. So if we can look into just the foundation so that people that are watching this can get some context on, well, where's this all even come from? Because we've talked about, people talk about tax loopholes and tax avoidance, but we're talking about discharging tax, which is a completely different thing. So, and I know in many of our other interviews that we've done and the protocols that we have, one of the pivotal documents I think that we discuss is HJR 192, isn't it? House Joint Resolution 192. So maybe we could start there, this sort of shift from 1933. Could you explain, in case anybody hasn't read it, or some people are interested in technical stuff, some people are not, but I think it's important that even if you're not that interested in this stuff, that you do get a basic understanding of how this all works and why it works. And that does require that you've got to read some stuff. So if you've not read House Joint Resolution 192, what is the significance of that? How did the suspension of that gold standard change the landscape and the nature of debt in America back then?
Well, this is one of the really big foundations that, in my opinion, everybody should have a grasp of what this is all about, because it is so fundamental to everything we're doing on the Monopoly Board of Commerce. So, picture in your mind, you are a living expression of consciousness, a living being, and you can't physically step onto an artificial game called Monopoly. How can you do that? It's not possible for you to step onto this realm, or into this realm, which is all artificial. So it's like a video game. It's like you're playing a video game. You are the player, and you're playing the game, and the game is Monopoly, right? Now, House Joint Resolution 193 is very pivotal to what happens on this Monopoly board, this artificial game of commerce that everybody's playing, whether they realize it or whether they don't. So we have to sort of unpack it a little bit to make more sense out of it. The living, breathing men and women, the consciousness, the energy of consciousness that flows through the body, is what is described in technical references that I put in a lot of my technical papers as the private side of a ledger. And on the other side of the ledger is a public side of the ledger. So if you have any grasp of accounting, which sadly I do, you have to have a balanced ledger. So the private side of the ledger has to equal the other side of the ledger, the public side. Because if you have an unbalanced ledger, literally accountants and auditors freak out, because you can't have an unbalanced ledger, right? You have to have a credit on one side with an equal debit on the other side, right? So that's just how accounting and balance sheets very, very simply work. You can't have
this is where people talk about balancing the books,
balancing the books, exactly. So if you think of it like a pair of scales, you can't have one side up in the air and the other side down. It has to be even. It has to be equal, right?
Okay.
And the reason why that's relevant to House Joint Resolution 192 and the shift in 1933 is because the United States, as a corporate entity, which it is, and you can reference this and you can prove this by looking at the EDGAR, the EDGAR database, it will show you that the United States Incorporated, not the de jure United States, because there are two United States. There's the real United States of America, the substance United States, and then there is the de facto United States of basically United States Incorporated, which isn't United States of America, it's United States. And you see President Trump is the president of the United States Incorporated.
Yes.
He is not the president of the United States of America.
No.
Okay, so I know we may have a lot of Trump fans on this podcast, perhaps, but I'm not talking politics. I'm just talking reality of the public and the private. You see, the public realm is the United States. The private realm is the United States of America. Okay, so how is that relevant to House Joint Resolution 192? Well, if you go a little bit earlier than 1933, if you go into 1913, have a look at what happened there. A group of bankers all got together in a place called Jekyll Island.
There's a great book on that, isn't there?
There's a book. G. Edward Griffin wrote a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. And it's not a horror story or Frankenstein or something like that. No, it's the top bankers who all got together and they cooked up a very attractive plan for them, which was how they were going to basically fleece the world population. And they would get rich, and everybody else who wasn't part of their club, part of their cabal, would get very, not poor is the wrong word, but they would be stressed. They would be slaves to the system. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And then you move into, well, how are they going to execute this plan to shift what used to be a monetary system backed by physical gold? How are they going to shift the world population? And it is the world population. It's not just the United States Incorporated that we're talking about. It is the entire world, because it's a one world system. And I can prove that through, again, the Edgar database. All of the countries that we think are de jure countries, land masses, England, Germany, Canada, Australia, these are all independent de jure nations. Well, they are, but they're not independent de jure nations on the Monopoly Board of Commerce. They are corporate entities, all registered to the United States. So you have to get this kind of landscape, because I can't answer the question just in 20 seconds, because I have to lay up the framework for it. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense, yeah? And you can verify everything I'm talking about by doing your own research. So in 1933, how are they going to shift all of this de facto countries into an artificial world where there is no money of substance anymore? Now that's important, right? Because when people say, well, I don't really care about money, I just use it, and as long as I've got enough coming in and I can do what I need to do, why would I need to care about it? Yeah, and I understand that it's a valid position to take.
Yeah.
But I think, and certainly for the value of our audience, that we need to understand a little bit more about what money is, because if you don't really understand what it is and what it isn't, how can you be successful in managing money? I think you need to know what it is. Right? Now, what it used to be a medium of exchange that was backed by physical assets, and predominantly in more recent history, physical gold. So you could literally go to the bank and say, here's my dollar, I want you to give me the gold. And they'd have to do that, because that was the law back in yonder year, all the way back. Now, you can't do that today, because there is nothing backing the money apart from the energy of the people. Okay, so House Joint Resolution 192 that came about in 1933. If you're going to make a monumental and fundamental shift in monetary policy, you can't bring that in and sell it to the world population unless you've caused a problem. Okay?
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, quite familiar. Yeah, so you cause the problem, and then everybody who doesn't realize that you were the cause of the problem wants the solution.
Of course.
Right? So it's problem, reaction, solution. It's David Icke. I think he coined that phrase many years ago, and it's absolutely true. So what problem did they cause? Well, they caused the Great Depression. And if you don't know much about the history of that, have a look at it. It's a fascinating period of time where in the 1920s, you had the roaring 20s, where people were having a great time. They were having a really good lifestyle. And, the sentiment of it was that, you know, nothing could ever go wrong. We're getting more and more prosperous, and they introduced the notion that you could take a line of credit from banks, and they actually did have real loans back then, you know, so you actually could borrow money that the bank actually had in reserve, right? So I'm not going to get too deep into this, because otherwise we go off on a tangent, but there was a real loan being provided by banks pre-1933, and people were borrowing in order to buy stocks and shares. It's called investing on margin. So you take the margin from the bank, which is a loan, you buy stocks and shares, and hopefully the stocks and shares go up in value, and then you can pay off the bank loan at some point down the road. But the problem is, what happens if the markets go down in value and the bank says, hey, that loan we gave you, we want you to pay it back. So what happened in 1933 was they engineered the Great Depression. And by engineering the Great Depression, where literally people went from living in a big mansion house to living on the street in a cardboard box. And I'm not dramatizing that, that's actually what happened, right? So these people that were pre-1933 had the great time of the 20s. They engineered it so that there was one of the biggest crashes in Wall Street that's ever been recorded. That's your problem, right? People were devastated by it. So they had to then bring in a solution, because that was their plan. They had to create a problem so they could bring the solution in. Well, the solution they brought in was to confiscate gold and replace it with the energy of the people. So if you still had some gold, which was probably not as many people had gold after the Great Depression as before it, or after 1933, you had to hand it over to the federal government. They literally confiscated gold. You could go to jail if you still held gold in your house or your vault or wherever you had your gold. And what they did was they replaced it with the energy of the people. So now what we call money is nothing more really than energy. It's the energy of the people. And they have basically taken out a massive mortgage over the energy of the people. So instead of gold backing money, now energy backs money. The economic productivity of the people backs the money. Okay? And that was the big shift in 1933. There was no longer substance-based backed money. There was energy-backed money, or you can't pick it up. You can't pick that substance up. You could pick a piece of gold up and you could put it in your vault, but you couldn't put the energy in the vault because it's not possible to do that.
No.
So that was a big shift in 1933. But because they took away the gold, they had to give something back in exchange. And something else happened, which was majorly important, was the United States Incorporated went into bankruptcy. And it's still in bankruptcy today, by the way.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not talking about it can't balance its budget and it's a bit short of dollars, it needs a few dollars. No. I'm talking about Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Yeah.
It means that it is operating. In the UK, we call it administration. In the United States, we call it Chapter 11, right? So you basically have to have a bankruptcy trustee that is going to oversee and balance the books, balance the ledgers for the bankrupt United States Incorporated. And that is what happened in 1933. They took the money away, they took the gold away, replaced it with the energy of the people. Chapter 11 bankruptcy occurred, and you can go and Google this, and we'll research it on the internet. James Traficant, the senator for Ohio, read out a speech, which you can still get now. It's still in the Senate record. It's as relevant today as it was in 1933. The biggest reorganization in world history has just occurred, which is the bankruptcy of the United States Incorporated.
So that is a pretty huge shift, and I hope that you guys are understanding the significance of that. The money as we knew it back then changed overnight from what we call money of substance to money of form. There's lots of different ways of describing that, but if we're the ones backing that, if our energy is what is now backing the money that is supposedly in circulation that everybody is using, let's talk a little bit about this payment versus discharge. Because if money isn't worth anything, then does that mean you can't pay for anything? So let's talk a little bit about that, shall we? Because if this protocol that we're talking about here today, the protocol will argue that debt can no longer be paid in the traditional sense. How can I pay for something if what I'm using to pay for it isn't worth anything? So if that's the case, what do I do? And this is the whole difference between what we know as a classical payment versus discharge. So could you talk to the differential between those two, Ian?
Yeah, again, this is fundamental because you see, pre-1933, you could have actually paid your bills.
Yeah.
You could have turned up and said, here is my dollar or my pound or my euro. Euro wasn't around then, but here's my pound or my dollar. And that was actually backed with gold.
Mm.
So that was a payment because you were actually exchanging something which had tangible substance related value.
Yeah.
But you can't do that today. And you couldn't do it straight after the House Joint Resolution 192 in 1933. All you can do today is issue a negotiable instrument to discharge a ledger. Because remember what I said earlier about it's all based on ledgers, and you have a positive side and a negative side. So if you want to discharge a negative side of a ledger, you have to add a positive side in, and that will balance the ledgers. Yeah. So discharging is all it is adding a positive to a negative to zero it out. So if you have minus 10 on one side, you have to put plus 10 on the other side.
Okay.
And then plus 10, if you add minus 10 to plus 10, you end up with zero. Yeah.
Yep, I've got that.
And that's it in a nutshell. That's discharge.
Right? So can't pay for anything. We can only discharge it now. So with that being said, what's the remedy? We talk about public policy of remedy. If the government's removed money of substance, we don't have that anymore, so we can't pay for anything, and that's been taken away from the public. Then what's this quote unquote public national credit system remedy that citizens are entitled to use then?
Well, stemming out of House Joint Resolution 192 is they had to take the gold away and replace it with the energy. Yeah, so that's what they did.
Yeah.
But when you replace the gold with energy and you back it, what they're actually doing is they're saying to all of the citizens that they've given all the citizens a remedy, which is the ability to issue negotiable instruments. Okay. So you're no longer going to turn up with a banknote backed by gold. No, but what you can do as a citizen, remember, a citizen is a construct. It is an artificial entity that's been created following the issuance of the birth certificate. So it is a corporate construct that is a banker. You see, the person that used the name on the bank card, driving license, and any other sort of publicly used document is a banker. And you can reference this by looking at the 1882 Bills of Exchange Act, which says what a banker is. And it says it's a body of persons.
Right.
Go and look it up, right?
Yeah.
If you don't believe it, go and look at the Bills of Exchange Act. And the definition of a banker is a body of persons. Well, a person is what we see from the birth certificate flowing into the driving license, bank card, passport, etc., right? So the person that is now a banker, which we didn't realize that we were all running around using the name of a banker without realizing it, is able to issue negotiable instruments. And negotiable instruments are part of this ledger of positives and negatives.
Right.
So the public policy of remedy was that in order to give something back to the people being the living, breathing men and women, not the persons, because the persons are birth certificate created construct, whereas the people are real. They're de jure. They're live and breathe. Yeah, they've got energy. So they took the energy from the people, the living, and they transferred it through the construct of the person, which is a decedent, and put that contract, that negotiable instrument contract, onto the Monopoly Board of Commerce. And the public policy remedy was that every living man or woman would be able to discharge the debt.
Okay.
Right? Because they have taken the energy from the living, and in exchange for taking the energy to back the whole Monopoly Board of Commerce, they had to give something back. And what they gave back was the ability to discharge debt by issuing negotiable instruments to discharge the ledgers.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's not about paying anything off. It's about discharge.
You're discharging ledgers. So you've got this ledger of positives on one side and negatives on the other that zero out.
Yep.
So when you get a tax bill, and this is going to blow your mind if you haven't figured this out already, right?
Yeah.
The tax bill says you owe the United States Treasury $100,000. Well, is that a positive or a negative?
I would say that's a positive. Knowing what I know, that's a plus on the. Is that a plus on the? No,
it's actually
on the ledger, or is that a negative on the ledger?
It's actually a negative. You see.
Okay.
So, because everything in this world is inverted, right? So when you get a bill, it's actually a negative, but it looks like it's positive. So if you're presented with a negative, how do you balance the ledger? You have to add a positive to the negative.
Yeah.
And that is discharge.
Okay. So if I've got a $100,000 bill, but money is now money of form, not substance, and I can't pay that bill, can't pay it off because it's not backed with gold, then discharging it is the only way that I can do that.
Okay, so let's just expand this a bit, because I can sense that a lot of people watching this are going to be scratching their heads thinking, hold on a minute, when I get $1 billion, it doesn't say minus $100,000 on it. It says I owe the Treasury $100,000. So that has to be a positive, right?
Yeah.
Intuitively, that makes sense, yeah. But not in the game of Monopoly, it doesn't. Because in the game of Monopoly, the 100,000 in this example is a negative, and it sits on the Monopoly board as a debt, because the whole Monopoly board is in bankruptcy. Yeah, it's all in debt. The whole system is debt.
Right. Okay.
So what appears positive is actually negative. And when you get the bill from the IRS that says that, oh my God, you open that envelope with the symbol on the corner of the envelope, which is it's a bit sinister because it's like the Grim Reaper.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Looks like, right? Looks a little bit like the Grim Reaper. What they're sending you is a negative, that the only way that you can balance it is to issue a positive to balance the negative.
Okay.
And because the bill effectively is part of the national debt, well, what did they give all the people? they gave all the people the ability to discharge the debt of the nation, because the United States went into bankruptcy in 1933, which means that it's always in debt. Who to? The people.
Right. Okay. So it really is inverted, isn't it, here? So if that's the case, we've talking about creditor versus debtor on other interviews as well. So if this, citizen as the creditor, how does what we're talking about here in this protocol itself, how can it justify this idea that a private citizen provides the credit that actually backs the national currency? How does that even work then?
Well, now we're going to get a little bit more deeper into this, right? Because the citizen is also a debtor.
Yeah.
Because it's a construct that sits on the monopoly board as a debtor. So the citizen, although it can issue negotiable instruments, because it's a banker, as we discussed earlier on the 1882 Bills of Exchange Act.
Yeah.
The problem is that it can't really justify its rights under House Joint Resolution 192, because it itself sits on the same monopoly board as the United States Treasury IRS as a debtor.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm thinking. So how can it be a creditor and a debtor in the same breath? It doesn't make sense.
Because the creditor is not the citizen. The creditor is the living man or woman.
Is the person. Okay. No, sorry, the one of the people, not the person.
Yeah. So the people are the creditors. That's the living men and women, right?
Mm.
And the person that is able to issue negotiable instruments, which is the construct, the birth certificate construct, the living man or woman is the true creditor. And if you watch our interviews that we've done on why you can recoup abandoned credit, on bank payments, mortgages, or anything else that is debt related, then the reason why is because the true creditor, known as the holder in due course of the credit, is able to present to the United States Treasury that they are the holder of the credit, the true owner, creator, owner of the credit. So when a citizen gets a tax bill, they could do things with it, which we'll talk about in a moment, endorsing it and things like that, right? And they could send it to the United States Treasury. But that would mean that a debtor is sending a bill of exchange to the bankrupt United States Treasury, claiming that it is a creditor.
Now I'm understanding. And I'm hoping that there's a little light bulb going off with other people here as well. To me, this is all about position, isn't it? It's about standing, is what it is. So people who are sending in or potentially sending in these endorsed bills, but they are operating as the citizen or as the person, they are doing that from a place of being a debtor, not a creditor. So that to me is that's a pivotal thing here, isn't it? That people need to understand. It's about where are you positioned in all of this before you actually send that in?
Well, you see, a lot of people talk on the internet and in forums about, you can send negotiable instruments and discharge all your debt. Yeah. Well, you can't really, because the debtor is not in a position, doesn't have the standing to discharge debt.
No.
But the creditor does. So how do you transition? How do you present in the right way the creditor to discharge the debt? Well, that's something which perhaps we'll talk about in the next section. I don't know.
Yeah, that's Well, okay, so I get that. I understand how that works now, that there is a distinct difference between creditor and debtor. A debtor cannot discharge, a creditor can. But it's, well, if that's the case, and you've got people who, have and probably still are doing right now, endorsing bills and trying to do this, then maybe they're getting themselves partially educated and they have a measure of understanding how it works, but it's not the full jigsaw puzzle here by the sounds of things. So let's talk a little bit about that then, because I think maybe the regulatory and the legal framework of all of this might start to fill in some of these gaps for people. So let's talk about federal obligations. I think this would be a good one to talk about. There's again, technical stuff here that we're going to dig into a little bit more. We're going to talk about US Code subsection 8. I think it's 18 US Code subsection 8, isn't it? That's a technical document that classifies an IRS tax bill as an obligation of the United States. So, how is a tax bill the obligation of the United States when it's sent to the individual taxpayer?
Well, yeah, it's because, you see, the United States is bankrupt and they are issuing a negative. The bill is negative, even though it appears positive.
Yeah.
But actually, in reality, it's an obligation of the United States. And what they're hoping is going to happen, which happens in 99.9% of the time, is the taxpayer will say, oh my God, I've just got this $100,000 tax bill in. I need to cash out my savings plan or cash in my cryptocurrency or my gold or my stocks and shares or whatever it is they've got, and send that to the Treasury. Because they don't realize that the Treasury has the obligation to begin with, and presumes, and in most cases is justified to presume, that the taxpayer doesn't have any clue about how this monopoly board system works, and will just stump up another negotiable instrument, which is based on their accessing their some other ledgers which they've got in their bank account or their savings account or their wherever they've got their reserves, right?
Okay.
Which is other ledgers. It's not real because there isn't any money. Yeah. So it's just part of a slavery model, because the United States Treasury, what they're really doing is they're sending through a negative, hoping that the uninitiated, uneducated, slightly incompetent taxpayer is just going to play the game that they want the game played in the way that most people play it, which is, oh my God, I need to cash something out or remove some savings from somewhere to pay the tax bill.
Which means
that you've got to stay on them. You've got to stay on the hamster wheel, haven't you? A bit longer. Yeah. You've got to run around that hamster wheel and earn some more credits from somewhere, whatever it is you're doing, so that you can maintain this perpetual debt tax slavery model.
Yeah. Yeah. Now it's starting to make sense. It really is. So moving on from that, if all of these bills are obligations of the United States, then there's another key element here, isn't there, which is called accord and satisfaction. So we're now getting into UCC code, which again, this is all stuff that you guys can look up. It's readily available. In particular, UCC subsection 3-311 we're going to talk about now. But this is talking about negotiation of a tax instrument back to the Treasury. So there's mechanics here that people maybe need to understand. We talk about, well, I owe this to the government. Now we're talking about the Treasury. What's the difference between them? Is there even a difference between them? So could you just dig into that? What role does that UCC code play in this negotiation of a tax instrument? We're talking about negotiable instruments now. How does that fall in line with the actual Treasury itself then?
Well, you see, if the Treasury were to receive a negotiable instrument, which is, by the way, that is a endorsement of the bill. So the tax bill comes in, it's a negative.
Yep.
When the correct entity endorses that bill, which is a negative, by adding a positive to it, which is the endorsement of the bill, and
we
sends it
correct entity here as well.
We're going to talk in a minute about what is the correct entity, right? So if you are matching a negative that you've received with a positive, and the Treasury have to accept that because that's the accord and satisfaction, which is written in all the way back to 1933. They have to, because they are the debtor to the living man and woman, because they're using the living man and woman's energy. So the United States Treasury, it's all inverted. The bill that looks positive is negative. The Treasury is in debt to the people. When they send the tax bill, they are hoping that the slave won't realize that they are a slave, and they'll just act like a good slave until a creditor turns up, the true holder of the credit that the Monopoly Board runs on, and endorses the bill and sends it to the United States Treasury in line with all the UCC codes, which you can read in my Ecclesia Law technical paper. I quote them all in there.
Yeah.
They have to accept the discharge because their own regulations, accord and satisfaction, says that they have to accept the discharge if the discharge is being tendered. Tender is an important word. A tendering of a negotiable instrument is tendered to them in the right way. And maybe we should now talk about how do you tender in the right way.
Okay. So let's go into that side of things then. We've spoken about accord and satisfaction. Let's talk a little bit about the actual Internal Revenue Manual. This is an interesting book, I'm sure, that many people might want to get their hands on. You reference this in your technical explanation of this, don't you? I'm not going to go into the actual section itself, but there is a section in the IRM that you talk about, which you class this as a procedural key to how this works. So just talk about, what are the specific instructions that the IRS manual talks about? So we've got these instructions. What does it provide an employee regarding a bill of exchange? What's the procedure here that it outlines?
Well, you see, fundamentally, a debtor can't issue a negotiable instrument, which is an endorsement of the IRS tax bill, unless it has the correct standing to do so. Now, you might get away with it, and it might work. You might endorse the tax bill and send it to the Treasury in the right office, in the right way, with all the right documents that go with it. And they might accept it, and they might go away because you've now balanced the ledger. The negative is being balanced by a positive.
Yeah.
But how does a debtor send a positive? A debtor can't send a positive, can only really send a negative, because debtors don't have credit. They only have debt, yeah?
Yeah.
So what you need to do is you need to interface where the true creditor is operating as the holder of the credit, and that is the living man, woman, that is now going to operate through a fiduciary structure.
Okay.
And the fiduciary structure is going to be a trust.
Okay. We've spoken about this before, haven't we? This is this doorway that you speak about, because you've got this monopoly board where everything is artificial and is debt-based, and yet we as the living creditors cannot operate on that board. So how do we transact with it? Where's the gateway between this fictitious debt-based game, as we call it, that everyone's playing, versus us as the creditors? Because if you're issuing one of these negotiable instruments from the person or the citizen or the debtor that's on the monopoly board, you can't issue a credit because you are a debtor. So how does the creditor issue the credit? And this is that gateway, isn't it, between the two that you're mentioning here, I believe.
Yeah, it's crucially important, because if you want to play Monopoly, then you should be playing it through a trust.
Okay.
And the trust sits on the Monopoly board as another artificial construct. But because the trust has fiduciary rights to discharge the debt for the true creditor, which is the living man or woman, now the fiduciary, which is the trust itself, can tender the discharge to the United States Treasury, issuing a positive that ultimately flows from the creditor, the living man or woman, through the trust as a fiduciary for the creditor.
So the trust is the door. Is that what you're saying?
The trust is the doorway into the public side. So if you think of just think of a doorway, right? So if you're on one side of the doorway, you're in the public. On the other side of the doorway, you're in the private.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to put a doorway onto the Monopoly board, it's a bit like if you, years ago watched Doctor Who. I don't know how many of the audience will know what I'm talking about. You go into the TARDIS and it sort of flies over somewhere else, or even I'll show my age even more. Mr. Ben, which most of the audience will have no clue what I'm talking about. But
no, I do.
Mr. Ben used to walk into the back room of a shop, and suddenly he transport himself into another world. He'd be in a jungle or in a desert or be somewhere else, right? Well, that's like a portal. It's like you're transferring through into another dimension. So the grantor trust is like stepping into Mr. Ben's back room of the shop, or the TARDIS, if you know who, right? And what you're doing is you're able to move from the private, which is where the creditor's energy is, through the doorway, which is the International Grantor Trust, where the doorway, the Grantor Trust, is going to be your fiduciary. And the IRS have to acknowledge the rights of the fiduciary, because the fiduciary can operate as a nominee for the true creditor.
Okay. Right. Now, I'm thinking here, if going back all the way back to Jekyll Island, where all of this was constructed, and what a very elegant ruse it is when you think about it, everything is a liability and an obligation of the United States. We're the ones that are actually in bankruptcy here, not all of these living people. But let's make them think that they're the ones that are the debtors and they're the ones that owe all the money, even though they don't. Fantastic deception, very, very well, planned out. Why would you even allow a doorway into this? So what I want to talk about now is if they want to keep this ruse going, and you're talking about this trust, this international trust being a doorway from the private into the public and being able to make that transition, that would bring me on to the next thing, which is, well, why would they even do that? Is there any evidence to support that a trust has the ability to do this in the first place?
Yeah, because you see in the IRS manuals, they talk about nominees. So now we're back into IRS publication 1212 and the use of the nominee. Every day and every moment of every day, banks are operating as nominees for the true creditors. What is a nominee? It's a fiduciary.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a trust. So when you go to a bank and you want to get a mortgage and you sign the mortgage contract and the bank takes your deposit, you've deposited the credit with the bank and they match it on the other side of their ledger. How can they do that? Well, they can do that because they're operating as a nominee for the true creditor. The true creditor deposited the energy, which is the credit for the mortgage, and the bank operated as the nominee and created the debt on the other side in the mortgage example. Well, taxes, when the United States is operating from a position of bankruptcy, all it can do is issue some more debt. So your tax bill is debt of the Treasury.
Yeah.
And it's waiting for someone to discharge the other side of the ledger. But the only entity that can discharge the other side of the ledger with a positive is a nominee for the true creditor, which is a trust.
Okay.
Because everything is a trust, yeah?
Okay.
Nearly everything that we're doing is trust.
It's trust-based.
It's all trust-based. Nearly everything on that Monopoly Board of Commerce is trust-based. We don't get to realize it because people don't know what trusts are. They get very confused when you talk about trusts, but it's really quite simple. You have a trustee and you have a beneficiary. It's as simple as that, right? Just strip it all the way, forget all the terminology. You have a trustee, fiduciary, and you have a beneficiary. That's
Let's
really
talk
all
about that for a minute. In case there's anybody here that is a little bit unsure, because I always felt that, going back years now, but I always felt that trusts were for wealthy people that had, lots of mansions and fine art and things like that, and they'd stick it all in a trust. And I think that's typically what a lot of people will think. Trusts are for wealthy people, for the elite. But let's talk about this trust that you've mentioned here, because it's not just any old trust, is it? This is something called an international grantor trust. So if this is allowed as this doorway, and we talk about this in other interviews that we've done, this is called our asset fortress, where we use an international foreign grantor trust. So why is it necessary to use this type of trust rather than just, submitting the discharge as a taxpayer? Why do we need to do it this way?
Well, you see, any entity that is part of the United States itself. So if you look at a United States citizen, for example, that United States citizen, the construct is a debtor by definition. Right. So the SSN holder is a debtor by definition. 100%. Okay? Go and look it up. You'll find that it's true that the SSN holder is the debtor on the Monopoly Board of Commerce. When you create an international grantor trust, the international grantor trust is not a debtor on the Monopoly Board. It's international, and it is a nation in its own right. And it can operate as a fiduciary for the true creditor, the holder of the credit, which is the living man or woman.
Okay.
What you're doing is you're creating a fiduciary structure that isn't a debtor of the United States. It sits outside of the United States bankruptcy.
So it's not in their jurisdiction then?
No.
Which is why you have an international one. Okay.
So now what you're doing is if you're going to discharge a 100,000 tax bill, which is a negative, instead of sending the tax bill a check, or a transfer from your bank account, what you're going to do is you're going to create an international trust, which doesn't sit on the Monopoly Board as a debtor. It sits outside of the board, away from the board as a debtor. It has a special category, and it is going to tender an endorsement of the bill, which is basically a negotiable instrument in accordance with the 1882 Bills of Exchange Act.
Yeah.
And that is a positive, which is going to balance the negative that the Treasury has issued out. Even though it looks like a positive, it's not, it's a negative. And can do that because your international trust is operating as a nominee for the true creditor, which is the living man or woman. Remember, the living man or woman can't step onto the monopoly board.
No.
Because the living can't step onto an artificial board. Only artificial constructs can, which is the person, which is an international trust. But the international trust doesn't step on the monopoly board as a debtor because it has its own nation. It's not part of the United States as a debtor construct.
Right. Okay.
So now it's operating as it's got its own special environment that it's operating from as a fiduciary for the holder of the credit, the living man, woman, the true owner of the credit that runs the whole monopoly board. Add the whole world population together, all the living men and women together who are not on the monopoly board. That is the energy, the $400 trillion of world debt is energy that's sitting on the monopoly board as debt, all belonging back to the creditors, the true creditors, which is the living men and women. But they can't just call up the Treasury and say, hey, I have just realized that you owe me, $100 million. Can you send it to me? Because that's not going to work, is it?
No.
Because they don't understand the rules of the game. You have to go in and out of the monopoly board through a doorway, through this gateway, this portal. And this portal has been left available. The International Grantor Trust is such a portal because the elites themselves use this portal. So that is why they have left the door open. Because,
that's why.
The super rich, do we really believe that they are so much more superior at playing the game of Monopoly than the rest of us, that they can amass huge fortunes just because they're so much better at playing Monopoly than we are? No. They might be better at playing Monopoly than the average guy who's playing it. But the reason why they've got extreme wealth is because they know how the ledgers work. They know how to recoup their credit, use discharge, operate through the International Grantor Trust. So they have to leave all these frameworks in place
for them to use it themselves. Now that makes sense. Because I was thinking, well, why would you even have this doorway there if they don't want people? But what they've done is they've very cleverly concealed it, haven't they? And as you said, only the elite and only the wealthy know where it is.
When you really get deeply into this, as I have done, a lot of people say the private and the public it's all fraud, it's all deception, it's not fair. And all of these kind of things. And many of those statements I agree with, right? But, and this is a really big but, in defense of the cabal, and you might be surprised to hear me say this, right?
What are you going to say next?
In their defense, right? They have put out, for those who want to find it, the way in and out of the matrix, in and out of the maze. They haven't got all the information locked up in a secret place that nobody can access. No, all the information is there for those that want to find it, and for those who can join the dots up and know what they mean. So they're in their defense, they would say, hey, if you want to pay taxes, if you want to pay debt, that kind of means that you don't know how the rules of the game operate. So we're going to treat you as a slave, as a debtor, because you don't play the game as a creditor.
No.
But we showed you how to play the game, but you didn't go and look for the rules of the game. So we're going to carry on treating you as a debtor, as a slave. because you keep on playing the game as a debtor.
Yeah.
And you keep jumping up and down saying it's not fair, and Discharge all corrupt, and it's not fair on me, and I've got this, that, and the other problem. And their response would be, I'm pretty sure, yeah, but we showed you how to play the game, but you didn't either bother to look for the rules or didn't understand the rules. Yeah. So you must be a bit incompetent, or you're a bit lazy, or both. So you don't deserve to play as a creditor, because you should stay as a debtor, and that's what they would say.
Well, I get that, because what's one of the biggest things that people complain about? It's taxes, isn't it? Yeah. Paying too much taxes. But what we're saying here is that really the responsibility for that is on the individual, in that they don't have to if they don't want to. It's just a case of learning how it works.
Yeah. For those people who like watching movies, right? Of which I've watched many, because there's lots of messages in movies. If you were to watch the movie Meet Joe Black, what's it about? It's about death and taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Only the dead pay taxes, by the way.
Yeah.
Because the dead is the person, the artificial construct, the decedent, the state. So death and taxes are kind of go together, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very clever. Well, let's talk about this trust a little bit more then, because again, I get it that it's this international trust, that it sits not on the monopoly board, but it can play the game on the monopoly board. In other words, it's not a US trust, it's not a UK trust. It doesn't fall in any jurisdiction. It is its own nation, as you call it.
It's foreign aid. Yeah, it's called a foreign aid. Yeah.
So what are the roles within the trust? I mean, we talk about this, don't we? We talk about the grantor, the trustee, the beneficiary. Can you just define those legal roles of the grantor, trust, and beneficiary in this process then, in terms of how this would work?
So the grantor is the construct. That's the birth certificate construct. That's the person on the monopoly board can operate as a grantor of a international trust, or of any trust. It doesn't have to be international, can be any trust. So the grantor is and sometimes called the settler. Means the same thing if you don't know different terminology. So you are basically the creator of the trust. So the artificial construct of the person can create a trust. So one dead entity, artificial entity, creating another artificial entity, which is the trust.
Yeah.
And then the same entity, grantor, the person, can operate as the trustee for the trust.
Okay.
So think of it like a company. You go and form a company, and somebody is going to fill in all the paperwork to form the company. And then the company springs into existence. And then you've got a shareholder who is going to benefit from the company. And you've got a director who's going to run the company.
Okay. That makes sense.
So if you've got a grantor, which creates the company or the trust in this example, the trustee is like the director of the company, but it's the trustee of the trust. And the beneficiary is like the shareholder.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Gets the benefit, yeah.
Okay.
But
in this scenario, I want you to differentiate between, we've got two constructs here. We've got the beneficiary, but we've also got the trustee who can be the grantor. So the grantor, you've already mentioned that the trust is it's not a living thing. It is it's a construct. So that has to be created by another similar construct, i.e. the person or the citizen, the birth certificate entity. So they can be the grantor. So for example, me, my birth certificate entity would be Andrew John Benson, capitalized. I can be the grantor of a trust. I can bring that trust into existence. I can also be the trustee, which is quite nice, because then there's no sort of, oh, who am I going to get to be the trustee? Who can I trust to be a trustee? I can do it myself. But what's the difference between those two and the beneficiary in this instance? Because there is a distinct difference, isn't there?
Right. Andrew John Benson, the living man, spelt with in the proper spelling of the name, in proper English, with capital letters at the beginning of Andrew John Benson, the AJB, capital letters, and the other letters in lowercase. And look at the Oxford Dictionary, look at all the law dictionaries, and it will tell you the proper name is a living man or woman. Right? And Andrew John Benson, spelt with capital letters, is the artificial construct. And the agent for Andrew John Benson as the artificial construct is Andrew John Benson, the living man. So the upper and lower case spelling of Andrew John Benson is the living man.
Right. Okay. That's the
and
differentiator.
The Andrew John Benson, spelled in capital letters, is the artificial construct. And the agent for Andrew John Benson, the uppercase spelling, the birth certificate, name, the driving license, passport, bank card, the agent is the living man. So on the Monopoly board, the Andrew John Benson, as the grantor and trustee, is going to create this trust, which is also able to sit on the Monopoly board, but it's not sitting on the Monopoly board as a debtor, because it's not part of the United States system as a debtor. It stands away from the United States bankruptcy, right? It's not part of the bankruptcy. The beneficiary of that grantor trust is Andrew John Benson, the living man. So the grantor and trustee is the uppercase spelling of Andrew John Benson. The beneficiary is the living man. It's also Andrew John Benson, but with the proper spelling.
Properly
spelled.
If
you ever get a court summons, if you are ever unfortunate enough to get a court summons, you'll see that it's spelled in uppercase. And if they really want to get serious, i.e. it's criminal, they spell the name the proper way, with the capital letter at the beginning of each name and then the lowercase. Because now they are focusing on the man, not the body corporate construct.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down that we won't go down today. But I do want to talk a little bit more about this fiduciary role that you mentioned. So how exactly does that work then? This fiduciary kind of buffer. So if there's this notice of a fiduciary relationship here, how does that change the way the IRS interacts with, with the corporate legal uppercase version of me? How does that work?
So when you create the grantor, which is the construct, the person as a construct, creates the international trust. The international trust is now operating as a nominee for the true creditor, the living man, is the beneficiary of the trust. Now, when the IRS and the United States Treasury get correspondence from the fiduciary, the grantor trust, they know that they have to take notice of that, because they're now operating with a fiduciary who represents the true creditor, which is the living man, the holder of the original credit, the ability to issue negotiable instruments on behalf of the true creditor, which is the living man.
Right.
So now when the Treasury receives an endorsed bill, negative being the tax bill, positive being the endorsement of the bill itself, from a fiduciary, where the fiduciary is operating as a nominee for the true creditor, they have to accept that as a discharge. Not only because that's just the way the game of Monopoly works, but because it says so in their own tax manual. which is all in my technical paper.
Yeah.
All the references are all in my technical paper.
Yeah. So we didn't write the rules on this, did we? They did. And all we're doing, so this is not a tax loophole. I want to be clear on this, guys. It's not a tax loophole. It's not tax avoidance. This is us playing the game by their rules. And if they wrote the rule book and we play the game by the rules, they have to accept that, because it's coming, as Ian said, from the right standing now. It's coming from the fiduciary role, who is representing the living, which is the creditor, which is the holder in due course. Now they have the right standing to be able to issue that endorsed bill. And they have no option but to accept it. Otherwise, they'd be breaking their own rules.
You see, this whole game of monopoly, whether it's taxes, whether it's mortgages, whether it's court cases, whether it's recouping abandoned credit, you have to know how to play as the creditor, not the debtor. Everybody who's playing as a debtor is going to lose. The debtors go to jail. The debtors are not going to find remedy. You can't pretend to be a creditor.
No.
You have to know how to be a creditor.
Yeah, that's
the fiduciary structure is how to do it. It's so fundamental. It's like it is that portal that moves you from private to public and public to private. That is the doorway that they have left for everyone to use, which most people haven't figured out because they haven't done enough research.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that then, because like you said, this gateway, this using the fiduciary role through the grantor trust is such a huge thing that you've researched. And I remember when you said that you'd found that, it was like, oh my God, this is it. This is what makes this work in the game of Monopoly. Such a pivotal part. So when it comes to that, this separation, because we've spoken about it being an international trust. So what are the technical advantages then of operating from this foreign standing, this international standing? You said that it's almost like its own nation, like a sovereign nation in its own right. What are the real advantages of coming from that standing when you're dealing with the US Treasury, for example?
Well, it's a great question, and I love that type of question, because you see, when you get even further into the technical nature of the way that the Monopoly Board works, the Monopoly Board works on securities laws called the Uniform Commercial Code. Now, the Uniform Commercial Code, or UCC, as many people will know it as, is international securities law. Now, a lot of people who don't understand what they're reading will say, no. The UCC only applies to the United States. And if you go and look on the internet and ask one of the internet search engines, does the UCC apply outside of the United States? It will say, no, it doesn't. It only applies to the United States. An international grantor trust qualifies as an entity under the UCC. So if you are if you're using it as your fiduciary nominee for the true creditor, now the true creditor, no matter where they are in the world, can access the UCC, which they say only applies to the United States, but it actually applies to anyone from any living man or woman from any country through an international grantor trust. Because the whole of the world is running on the UCC securities model, which is a US model. So if you go and ask your local expert, I want to invoke my rights under the UCC as a citizen, right? They'll say, no, that only applies in the United States. People use UCC filings in courtrooms in the United Kingdom, in Australia, in Canada, in New Zealand, and the courts throw them out Why? Because the citizen, although it's registered to the United States, doesn't qualify for the UCC.
No.
But the International Grantor Trust
does.
Oh.
Okay. So that begs the question, and you might not want to answer this on today's episode, but does that mean that this might not just apply to US taxes?
Well, it's a great question, because I'm going to be talking about how people from other countries can use this construct that I've put together, this protocol that I've put together, to discharge the taxes that they might be receiving, the bills they might be receiving in other countries.
Wow.
Because the way in and out of the United States Treasury is through the International Grantor Trust.
That's why I asked the question. That's amazing. That's really exciting stuff. But obviously we'll come back to that. Let's kind of finish off what we were talking about today. So I understand now how it works. I understand why it works a little bit more, and I hope that you guys do as well in terms of the mechanics. We have gone a little bit deeper than maybe we would normally go. You know, normally we talk about, well, what's the real world benefits to me, you know, operating in this way. But this is, I think it's important that people understand the mechanics of some of these things as well, and they take an interest in the history behind this to get the context as well, because then all the pieces do start to come together a little bit more, don't they? So let's talk about the actual execution of this then, Ian, in terms of how it works. Walk me through, for example, the actual endorsement itself. You know, we've spoken about how people maybe have been trying to endorse bills, but they've been doing it wrong because they've been doing it as the debtor, not the creditor. So if you could walk me through, you know, the actual physical endorsement process, why there's language that needs to be used here, isn't there? You know, when people endorse a bill, it has to say without recourse, pay the order of US Treasury. It's got to be on the original instrument itself. That has to be on there. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, so when you get a bill from the United States Treasury or the IRS or any tax office for that matter, they're sending you this negative, which looks positive, right? So that it's a bill.
Yeah.
Because it's a debt. They're sending you a debt. They're sending you their debt, right? Because they're in debt and they're sending you more of their debt, right? So they want you to discharge that either with sending them some new digits or endorsing it. And if you endorse it through the International Grantor Trust, operating as the fiduciary for the living man, woman, the true creditor, and the endorsement is now coming from the fiduciary. That's the trust, the International Grantor Trust, as the nominee for the true creditor. Now they have to take notice of that, and in their own code, it's all in my technical paper. The language that is put onto the bill is pay to the order of the Treasury. Well, the Treasury is sending you their debt, so it's saying pay them out of the exemption, which is the creditor's exemption, to discharge the ledger, which is a negative ledger, with a positive. The endorsement is the positive that balances the ledger. So what you do, and we facilitate all this, by the way, and we're not asking you to go and research all this and know how to do all this. An International Grantor Trust is established in the way that we described just now. The tax bill comes in to the citizen, the debtor, the citizen sends the tax bill to our office, our tax office, and the office will then create the International Grantor Trust, will then issue correspondence on behalf of the taxpayer, that the true creditor has turned up through the International Grantor Trust, and dispatched to the United States Treasury with all the right language and wording to the right office of the United States Treasury, because there's a specific office in the Treasury that takes the packages in to discharge the debt from a nominee fiduciary. That is all dispatched. The ledger is then balanced at the United States Treasury. The tax bill is gone.
Okay. Sounds amazing. So if that's just the mechanics of how it's done, how is the bill actually settled? Because you talk about Fedwire settlement as well, don't you? And how that actually works. So once the Treasury gets this package then, and they've had that, how is it actually settled through what's called the Fedwire system within the Treasury?
Well, the Treasury runs in combination with the International Monetary Fund, and they run this thing called Fedwire, which is all of the debt flowing around the system via a Fedwire-based banking system, right? So when you go and get a mortgage, for example, you deposit your energy, and debt is created, and that debt is now recorded inside the Fedwire system.
Okay.
So all of the negative debt, the debt that there's 400 trillion of debt, is all recorded via the IMF at the top of the pyramid, all the way down through all the different banking layers, the International Monetary Fund, the Bank for International Settlements, the central banks, the clearing banks, the investment banks, the local banks, the fintech banks, blah blah blah, all the way down through this big pyramid. The whole of that system is managed through a Fedwire reporting system, which also works with the Depository Trust Company, which is the DTCC, which also records all the securities. So the tax bill that the IRS is sending out, or any tax office is sending out, what is that? It's a security, yeah? They're sending you a debt as a security, because that's what a security is. It's a debt. And it's recorded in the Fedwire system. All of these things are recorded. Everything is tracked and traced as securities issuance. So they send you the debt. You think it's a positive value. It's actually a negative value. You then you invoke your right as the true creditor, as the creator of the credit that sits on the monopoly board. You then set up your international grantor trust, which sits outside of the United States as a fiduciary. It's not a part of the debtor system, but it can operate under the Uniform Commercial Code, which is the security system that the whole world runs on, through the United States, even though it looks like it's not outside the United States. It looks like it's only in the United States. It isn't. It applies to everything in that big banking pyramid, right? So then when you discharge the negative that they've sent you with a positive, that's the endorsement through your fiduciary, which is your international grantor trust, they have to record that in the Fedwire system, because the negative side of the ledger has now been balanced with a positive side of the ledger, which is the endorsement. And the Fedwire system records that. Okay.
So if that's how it's settled, before we go any further, I've got another question I'm thinking here. As an individual, if I was the person with the tax bill, as we call it, once that's been done, am I going to get a letter from the IRS or from HMRC or whoever it is saying, thanks for paying your tax bill, it's now zero?
No. What's going to happen is they're just going to go quiet. They're going to go silent, because they don't have to confirm that the ledger has been balanced. Remember, you've got a negative on one side. So if that's our equilibrium line, they send you the bill, which is down here. And you're going to send them this, which is going to equal it up. And it's going to disappear. It's just literally going to disappear from the ledgers. It's going to look evaporate.
So they'll literally just go quiet. That, I suppose, if they turned around and sent evidence that it had been paid that way, as in I got a letter, an official letter, that kind of sets a precedent, doesn't it, then, as well?
Yeah, that's a little bit too. They're really now stepping into. Hold on a minute. Is this going to go on the internet and everyone's going to jump onto it? We don't really want these people to know about this system, so we're not going to confirm that it worked. We're just going to go silent.
Okay, interesting. Okay. One other thing that you mentioned about just the administration of this, the mechanics of this, is to do with registered mail as well, isn't it? So there's this registered mail protocol. Why is that a strict requirement for this? Why do you have to use registered mail when you're sending these documents to, I think they go to Washington, D.C., don't they?
Yeah, the fiduciary, which is the International Grantor Trust, is basically, it's now playing the game of securities, right? This is the game of monopoly, it's securities. And if you're going to play the game of securities, you have to use the mail system to register your security. That's the endorsement of the bill as a registerable security.
Okay.
And the mail does that for you.
Ah, okay. Is this anything to do with the postmaster rule, or is that different? Or
well, you see, the postmaster used to be, and many will argue still is, the most powerful office in the world, because the postmaster is basically more important than all the central bankers, politicians, and everybody else, right? Because the postal system is what really regulates the securities. It's like the rails that run the whole system is based on the postal system. Now, although most of the things nowadays are electronic, the registered mail is still very, very, very relevant. Back in the days when there used to be, the stagecoach used to go from one side of the country to the other to deliver the mail. That was very important because that was an official registration of a message from one side to the other side, the sender to the receiver. So when you use registered mail, it still qualifies as a delivery rail for securities. Wow. And the postmaster has that position because the postmaster is in the public side like a registrar. It's like a registrar. It's a very important position, the postmaster.
Gotcha. Okay. So, because a lot of people just think of registered mail as, well, I need to send it registered mail so I know it got there. But it clearly, it's a lot more than that, isn't it?
Well, it's more than that in this context, because in this context, if you don't send the endorsement through registered mail, you're not playing by the rules of the securities regulations. You have to send it registered for it to qualify. You can't just drop it off if you're passing the office or send it on an email. You have to put it into registered mail. And in the US system, they have a green card system. Now, why would they have that? Well, they have the green card because the green card is evidence of securities transactions. I could go one step further. I won't go too deep. I'll just go one little step further. Why would sending something in the mail be wire fraud if it's a lie or malicious? Because it's a security.
Okay.
It's not really for this.
No, but these are little.
It is kind of relevant.
These are little nuances that do give further context and they're definitely appreciated. I just want to go back to what you said earlier about it all going quiet, and that they're not going to give you any confirmation that this has gone away. It just goes quiet because it's balanced at that point. So let's talk a little bit about avoidance versus discharge then, because I'm sure there's going to be some people that are thinking, well, if you don't get confirmation of this, then surely it's not real. Surely it is tax avoidance. How do you feel this protocol? How does it define as a real lawful administrative kind of channel to doing this then?
No, I completely understand. If people want to get some sort of email back or a letter back, thank you for your discharge, the file is closed, that tax is discharged. I mean, you're never going to get that. And the reason why you're never going to get it is because the public doesn't talk to the private. You see the bill's in the public side, and you've discharged it through the portal, through the grantor trust, which is the portal in and out of the public and private, and they don't talk to the private. And then there's one more thing, right? And this is going to be, you know, a bit more of an eye opener. The king or queen, when they send something to the debtor, they don't expect the debtor to say, yeah, and your account's been settled. Because the creditor doesn't seek confirmation from the debtor. It's a mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't. It's about standing, right? The creditor that is the living man, woman, doesn't say, I want to get confirmation from the dead that my discharge worked. No, it did work because you instructed the dead side of the ledger, the public side. The living issued a positive energy by endorsing to the dead side of the ledger. Why would it seek confirmation from something that's dead that it worked? It's the ruler, it's the king, the queen, the emperor. It sent an instruction through its agent, which is its fiduciary trust, the grantor trust, to discharge the debt that it received. In fact, it's quite pissed off, actually, because the creditor should never have received the debt in the first place.
In the first place, yeah. That makes a huge shift, I think. And I hope that makes a shift for a lot of people, that a lot of what we're talking about here is that creditor-debtor mindset, isn't it? You have to have the mindset of the creditor. And if you have the mindset of the creditor, that changes a lot. You know, it changes a lot when it comes to people's stress levels, when it comes to worry, just because they're now reframing where their standing actually is. So what you said there makes total sense. Why would you, you know, sheepishly say, oh, can you please let me know that that debt's been paid? It was never yours to begin with, was it?
No, they had the nerve to send you their debt. You should be upset.
Yeah.
Because you are crediting them all the time. And yet they send you their debt, asking you to go and earn some money in the language of the Matrix to pay off their debt. Well, when you get that bill, you should be upset that they had the nerve to send the bill to the creditor when they're the debtor.
Do you know
if you went for a meal and you're sitting there with your wife at the table, and somebody, the waiter comes over and says, I'm just bringing you the bill for the table over there. It's £2,000. There's a big table of them. They've had champagne, lobster, caviar, and we're sending you, they're giving you the bill.
Yeah.
How would you feel?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
exactly
what's going on in taxes.
Yeah. And I think if people take nothing away from this interview, but that to me is a win. Because when you understand that, and when you reframe how you think about who you actually are and how you can play this Monopoly game to your advantage by their rules, not ours, like we've already said, it's their rule books, not our rule book. We're just playing the game the way they intended it to be played. They just don't make those rule books very well available for people. That's all. But with this particular protocol, Ian's figured it out, done a lot of research surrounding this. This is not avoidance. This is true discharge the way it was intended from the creditor. So we're talking about endorsing a bill in the right standing, using an international grantor trust and a fiduciary role to be able to do that. That's the gateway into the public from the private, and that you won't get any recognition that it's been done. Why should you? That's what we're trying to say here. You are the creditor. You shouldn't be seeking confirmation of something that was never your bill to begin with. But from what you've said, Ian, it all goes quiet, and that's amazing.
The best way to look at this is debtors try and avoid and creditors discharge.
Yeah. Well, I will leave everybody on that one-liner there. But do you have any final thoughts in conclusion, Ian? Anything that you want to wrap up with before we go?
Well, just, to say that if you don't believe anything I've said, then please make that known, and I will answer your question, because that's generally what things are. Is if you don't believe me, you're really asking a question. You haven't quite figured something out, or you think that I haven't done my research correctly. And I absolutely love being challenged technically, because I'm pretty confident about my technical research. So I'm very happy to be challenged. You don't have to believe everything I've said. You might think I'm full of bullshit, but if you do think that and you want to challenge me over it with your own research, for example, again, my door is open. I'm happy to accept any challenge on anything I've said. I put all my technical papers out through Ecclesia Law. We're just about to put that into a platform that will be a free to subscribe platform. We're just working on that at the moment, because I believe that what I'm doing with my research, even if you don't believe me, it will certainly spark some interest for some people who are inquisitive, who want to read a little bit more. And if they want to get into my research, I've written, I don't know, at least 50 technical papers in the last 2 to 3 months. They've all got some merit, in my opinion. And if you want to get hold of those, then if you'll have a look on our link tree coming up soon, there will be a link on there and you can subscribe. Every time I write a technical paper, you can receive it, or you can get it in our public Telegram channel, because nearly all the research papers that I'm writing recently, not every one of them, but nearly all of them, are being published in that Telegram channel as well.
Yeah. So there's lots of avenues that you can get this information. This is obviously going to be on our ROS Media channel for people to watch. We'll also post it in the Telegram channel as well as a link, so that people can go and watch it directly from there. And all the mechanics and the technical references that we've made today are all backed up in Ian's documents on Ecclesia Law as well. So there's plenty for you to dig your teeth into, and genuinely we would encourage that you do that. Even if you're not technically minded or you don't really like that kind of stuff, I think, and I'm sure Ian does, it's important that you have an understanding of how this works, because this changes everything for people. Just understanding that creditor-debtor framework. Once you become that creditor, that also puts a lot of responsibility on you to operate in the right way, to operate correctly. Otherwise, if you don't know what you're doing, you can get yourself in trouble. And we know what we're doing here. This whole doorway of using this 98 grantor trust, this fiduciary role, is a pivotal part in operating between public and private. Many people are not doing that. They're not understanding it, and that's why. So dig into the technical stuff if you can, guys, and we will be back, no doubt, with another interview where we're going to be talking further, not just about more of the protocols that we have, but how you can practically apply these in your life. Our goal here is to get people from where they are to where they ideally would love to be. And for us, that is freedom. We want to help people free themselves from this debt slavery-driven model and operate as the true creditor. We have protocols that allow you to do that, and we have the knowledge, and we have the manpower here and the expertise to be able to help facilitate that as well. So I'm super excited about the journey ahead. If you've only just stumbled across us, if you've been with us for a while, then look out for the next episode, and we will see you shortly. Bye for now, guys.
Bye for now.